Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Margaret, and I was asked to come and share a quick story about how my faith has brought meaning to my life since becoming a Christian. So it was about 2 years ago that I acknowledged the sin in my life and really sought forgiveness and committed my life to following Jesus the way that he calls us to follow him. So up to that point, I wouldn't say I was quote unquote a bad person, but I think largely I was pretty self-centered. And I think my meaning was found really in where I could find happiness, what could make me happy, what could make me successful. And I'm not saying in and of themselves those are bad things, but I was lacking identity and I was lacking being rooted in something. And it took quite a few discussions with a colleague of mine who I was going through my PhD with at the time. We'd sometimes meet after our weekly seminar class, and he would lovingly search my thoughts and challenge my worldviews. And I found this whole process incredibly frustrating because up to that point, I didn't think there was anything wrong with my views. And yet I found myself at the same time longing for more and more of those discussions. And soon he introduced me to more of his friends, and I was just surrounded by some of the McMaster navigators who just loved me and really started walking me through some tough questions. And we had many, many late nights where we dove into scripture, and I had no idea what was going on. And those were really meaningful times to me in my journey and in my walk, because up to that point I thought, well, even if there is a God, you know, I was born this way. He must have wanted me to be this way, and I was okay with that. I just thought, I'll just try to be a good person. And then as we started diving deeper and deeper into Scripture, I found, while yes, we're born into a sin-filled world, and while we all have sinful desires in our hearts, we're actually called to a much more abundant way of living. And I believe that that is only found in and through Jesus. So this is a lifelong process. You know, we're told in the Bible that we're called to die to ourselves. We're called to die to the things of this world and to store our treasures up in heaven, not have worldly treasures here on earth. So this takes a lot of obedience, and it really does take a heart that wants to seek God and not seek the things of this world. So really quickly, I'm going to share a story about my oldest brother, Matt. So I was born in a single-parent family, raised by a wonderful mother, and with 3 older brothers. And when my mom died 7 years ago from cancer, my relationship with my oldest brother just sort of fell apart. We'd always had a strained relationship for my entire life. Just never saw eye to eye on anything, and I love him dearly. But just a challenge, and I think a lot of it had to do with the condition of my heart, to be able to love him, being so different than I was. And our grief was so divergent after my mom died that we basically just didn't talk for a year, and I think I was okay with that at the time. Now, just to step back to when I became a Christian 2 years ago, I think one of the biggest changes for me was the heart-transforming work that God did with my brothers. I was always snippy. I didn't have patience in many situations, and was just angry a lot, especially throughout my mom's illness. So I really have had my heart softened, and I know that's not my work. And In a lot of situations, that anger has just been totally transformed and flipped around to compassion for what they're going through and their life situations and challenges and struggles. I've also seen a wisdom in how I deal with situations, when to talk, and as some people know, I talk a lot, and when to just listen. And that's just fundamentally shifted for me in a lot of those situations. And God has certainly helped me now with respect to seeing what God has to offer is best, better than what the world has to offer. So my brother Matt recently went through a tremendous loss. A young girl that he helped raise from infancy, Rose, passed away. She was 10 years old. This happened a couple months ago, and my brother Matt called me a couple weeks before and was so excited to share what he had done for Rose. And my brother Matt isn't in a good financial situation, and he told me I made my way to Toronto and took her out of Sick Kids Hospital, and he spent all of his money taking her around the city, just helping her be a kid for a day and forgetting her challenges and what she's going through. And he took her out, he bought her gifts, he took her for her favorite meal, and then he brought her back to the hospital. And when he called me and had this excitement, as a fairly new Christian, I'm sure you can imagine how I reacted. And if you thought it was in a positive way, you'd be absolutely wrong. In my mind, I didn't outwardly say anything, but in my mind I was thinking, my goodness, Matt, when are you going to get your life together? Like, how can you be so careless with money? This is reckless. And it came out of a place of love. I'm always worried about my brother Matt. But boy, I didn't focus on a single thing that he did for Rose. And it took me getting off the phone and talking to my friend for him to speak truth into my life and to, again, help me see this situation through God's lens and not my own lens and my own agenda, which was focused on monetary things and sustaining my brother. But this friend spoke this truth into my life and just really helped me see how richly he had blessed Rose. It should have been so obvious to me, but my own worldly thoughts were getting in the way, and the whole situation just was humbling. And when I really think about it, I think God blessed all three of us in that situation, Rose and my brother and me, because I see through my brother the love of Jesus, that self-sacrificing love, that servant heart, which is so much larger than what I even have right now as a Christian. So boy, amazing experience and humbling experience. I'm just going to close off, but I often think of God as creating these little ripples in our lives. And so he created one with me and one with Matt and one with Rose. And when he interweaves our stories and our hearts together, I think of it as turning into a wave with more energy. And I know we don't always get to see the crest of the wave. God doesn't always show us the fullness of what he's doing in all of our lives. But boy, I feel like when we get these glimpses, it's such a blessing and encourages us onward. So I'm going to close there. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. You can call me Dave if we're talking later. I don't really go on formalities too much. So I was just asked to share a little bit about what God has done with me, how spirituality has been meaningful in my life. To give a bit of a background, growing up, I had no religion. I hated religion, didn't want a thing to do with it. It was described by a friend of mine that the first time I was getting exposed to Christianity, I kind of walked in and said, I don't believe any of this crap. Well, then what ended up happening was I ended up becoming a Christian. I describe it a little bit if any of you go online. If any of you go online, you can probably see my testimony. It's recorded if you look up Dave Brock McMaster. It's like one of the first things that pop up. So I'm not going to go into any detail about that. You can see it if you want. But I'm just going to expand on kind of what God's done since then. Because oftentimes we think, oh, Christians have it all together. They're all joyful, wonderful people, and I didn't find that at all. Like, there's been aspects of that which totally come out from time to time. I notice there's a number of my students here as well, so this may kind of speak to you. Is they normally see me at the front of the room, always happy, full of energy. Am I always like that? No. There's been a lot of times when, to be honest, since I've become a Christian, I felt like quitting. I wanted to stop. There's been times when I worry about, what am I going to say? Am I going to embarrass myself? Am I going to embarrass Jesus? Am I going to be a bad example of what a Christian is? One of those times is right now. Christians tend to be put on pedestals, and people tend to wait for them to mess up. And all of that weight, all of that burden seems so heavy. And I don't always know what to do. And then at the same time, you worry. What do people think about me? I don't like to be disliked. I don't like people looking at me, judging me. But that's when it actually all comes back to God and to what Jesus did. What I realized when I became a Christian was that what the scriptures say, what the Bible actually says, is true. And one of those verses that I cling to is what God has said about, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Now I look at that and I'm like, look at what's going on in my life, and you're saying it's easy. But then I realize, if God wasn't there during those times, it's not me getting through it. God is carrying me through that. He's giving me the words. There's times when I don't know what I'm going to say, and he gives me the words. I shared my testimony with some students where I didn't know how they would react. I was pretty sure that they didn't know the Lord, and it could have been thrown back in my face. And I just poured out, coming from my heart, with the words that God gave me, and you know what? Things work out. There's been times, I'm sure all of you can relate to this, when you've had, how many different assignments due? You've got work, you've got, you're going out with friends, you've got all of these plans set, and you're like, how am I possibly going to get this all done? I can tell you, there was a time, not exaggerating, 3 weeks ago, I went to talk to a colleague of mine who was another Christian, and was like, you know what? There's no way I can get these things done. And they have to get done. If they don't get done, then students suffer, and I can't accept that. There's no way. We've got these meetings, we've got these deadlines, we can't meet them. I can't do this. And the friend of mine pointed out, they're like, you know what? God put all of these things onto your plate. You accepted them, relying that God would help you get through them. And I said, yeah, that's right. And I was like, that's true about the yoke being easy and the burden being light. Through God, if he wanted me to do these things, I'm going to be faithful to him. So the whole idea that I'm just going to trust him, he's going to make it work. As soon as I gave it over to him, when I put my trust in God, no kidding, I got an email. Oh, by the way, we can't have this meeting at this time, so we're going to postpone it till next week. Got a phone call from a friend. I can't make it to this study we were going to do, so I can't make it. It freed up just enough time to get the stuff done that I had committed to doing, and we met the deadlines. God, if you are obedient to God and you put your trust in him, he's time and time again, and to be honest, I feel bad sometimes when I doubt him, but He's shown himself, and through that, I've been able to put more and more faith into him. It's kind of like when you're making a new friendship. At first, you're a little bit hesitant. You put a little bit of trust into them, and when they reward that, you put more trust into them. And once you build up that relationship and once you build up that trust, you can really rely on them. And I'm getting to the point, I'm always growing. I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect. But I'm continually working towards that. God is always working in my life. And through that, God's love actually works in me every day. And when I talk to students, I tend to connect with students. That's why I enjoy teaching. That's why I got into teaching, is seeing the expressions on people's faces when they're actually getting what I'm saying. Why do I put the effort into it? It's because I genuinely love the students, and I want to see them succeed. If I can help them achieve their dreams, that's meaningful to me. I care about what happens to them. It's not just a job. I could have done anything. I'm choosing to do this, and I put everything I have into lecturing, into teaching, because I want them to succeed. I want you guys to succeed. And that is coming from God. He's done so much in my life. I want to do as much as I can in all my fellow students' life, in my colleagues' life, in my friends' lives, in my church's life, in my wife's life. I want to be the best I can. And I can't do that on my own. It's impossible. I have to rely on God, and He has made my yoke easy, and He has made my burden light. Whenever I can't do it, I just rely on Him, and He's never, ever failed me. So those times when I've wanted to give up, I don't deny it. I think, how much easier would it be if I just stopped and I could just do what I want? But then, you know what? I wouldn't be able to pass it to Jesus, let Him take that burden, and I wouldn't be able to succeed. And on top of it, being a scientist, I very much value truth. What is a scientist? They're there to pursue truth, right? When it was revealed to me that the Bible was true, I can't turn my back on that. So it drives me. It's what keeps me going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, David and Margaret, for sharing and just opening up your lives to us. Little windows in your lives allow us to, I guess, get a sort of a picture of what motivates you, what you wrestle with. One of the things I think, and you could sense this, I think, as they were sharing, to talk about spirituality is a very vulnerable thing. You know, like when I hang out with the guys and I'm talking about the Raptors or, you know, who's going to win, the Seattle Seahawks or Denver, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, we can talk about any of that sort of stuff. It's not very vulnerable. But if I start talking about a spiritual experience, what's going on emotionally inside of me, and guys typically don't tend to go there. You know what I mean? That feels way more vulnerable. So I just really want to honor your courage to sort of stand up and share and put yourselves out there like that. Because I think that helps us watch you as you wrestle with putting words around, trying to describe an experience that you have. A couple of things that jump out as I was listening, and I think it's somewhat common. It's definitely common to my experience. In the job that I do, I end up interacting with a whole pile of people, and the thing I can see is, you know, the human race is a beautiful, widely diverse collection of creatures that see things differently, experience things differently. We have a common experience, and yet for each one of us, there's something unique about it, and you just can't put us into just one category. We have a wide range of experience. So one thing, though, that I've found, I'm trying to wrestle through what's some of our common experiences. One of the things I see appear again and again, quite commonly, and I heard this again in some of the stories you're sharing, is that we wrestle with this sense of wanting connection. We as a creature, as a species, are trying to connect. We have a longing for something beyond. And this goes right back to the caves and the drawings in the caves and the early temples that were built. Like, this is not like a recent invention. As far back as we can trace the human species, we've been trying to connect. We also have this sense, you could hear it too, this sense of growth or progression of, you know what, there's something that is a bit wrong with me, but I don't feel like that has to limit me if I can have a connection, if I can have something more. I can be drawn into a better version of myself. And so we may use words like, I sinned, I did something wrong, I failed, but I want to move beyond that. I want to move to a place where I do that less and less, and I want to progress. I want to become something more than what I am. And this, again, it's you can sort of go through the history books, and you can see these types of themes appearing all over the place. And as I work with people, I see this is our common experience, or a part of our common experience for many people. One of the other words that was used was this word trust or faith, of moving beyond questions, calculations, to something tips, and now I trust. This, again, is a part of our human experience, not just with the sense of what's out there, and do I believe something's there, and do I trust that, connect to that, or have some sort of allegiance or alignment with that. But that's just a part of who we are. Maybe some of you have heard this name in some course, John Gottman and the Love Lab. He'll appear in popular magazines as well as in classrooms. John Gottman studies, who's heard of John Gottman? Has anybody heard of John Gottman? At the stage of life you guys are at, a lot of you should check out John Gottman, okay? The Love Lab, he studies in an intensive way, probably the most advanced institute that we have, on male-female relationships or pair-bonded love relationships. So he studies love, the Love Lab. And so he gets couples in and he just examines them and goes into what they call thin slicing, really getting into their interactions and talking about what is this thing, this bond, this love bond that happens. And so in his research, he has come up, and his team has come up with, I think, a pretty helpful model that just puts in very simple terms how we come to this place of trust. And put it in my own words, this is what I would say. There are three key messages that if two people give to each other, in time, if we stick with those three key messages, we'll come to trust each other. And those three key messages are, I like you, or I like you a lot. I respect you, and I'm going to honor you in that way. And then I want to spend time with you. And so if me and another person, just like, I like you, I really like you, I really like you. And then, I respect you. What you just said, that was a good point. You know what? I just changed my mind. Or you asked me not to do that, I'm not doing that because I respect you. And then finally, I want to spend time with you. You want to spend time with me? Really? And we just saying that back and forth. Pretty soon it's like, aha, right? We have a relationship, and that's a good thing. And then John says, once you have trust, and trust is an emotional thing. It's not a mental thing. I will now choose to trust you. You don't like me, you don't respect me, you don't want to spend time with me, but I'm making that choice. It's not that. It is literally an emotional thing that clicks, a switch that switches over, and then allows us to do important works like solve problems together. Solve problems on the basis of, I know you have my well-being in mind, I have your well-being in mind. Now we just focus on fixing this problem or this difficulty we're having. You can do things like work at shared experiences and building meaningful experiences. And accomplishing goals together. And then you can finally build this sense of story or shared meaning because you trust. Once that trust goes, you're unable to do those things start to fall apart and the relationship starts to erode. I think that's an important thing to understand because in a lot of times what I've understood in the early phases of starting a relationship or checking something out, we're very much in a fact-finding mode. We're not in trust mode. We're just trying to figure out what's sort of on the other side of the relationship. I have iPhone. My son, who's in high school, has an iPhone. And there'll be a lot of times that we're doing some fact-finding around his iPhone. Because what has happened is a girl has texted him. Okay? And then I, as a loving father, I'm coming alongside him to dissect, to figure out what this text means. Now, can any of you relate to that? Yes, you can relate to that. And these are the types of things that go on. It's not just, what did she say? Right? It was, how long has it been since she texted me last? And how did that end? And how many minutes was it when I replied before she replied? And then how did she reply? And did she ask another question, or did she just make a statement that ended the text conversation? Does that sound familiar? Okay, you guys are laughing. So then I, as a father, I continue the investigation. Okay, this is an interesting girl. Do you have a picture? Right? I want to know. So then he's like, okay. So he gets a picture out, shows me a picture. I'm like, Look at him, look at her. That's a pretty good match. Okay. So we got another data point. You know what I mean? Like, looks like she might like you, and you might like her. She texted you. Then we say, okay. So then I start to coach him. This is how you should text back. And then he's like, no, I can't say that. Are you crazy? I'm like, all you're doing is like asking a nice, normal question that allows her then to know you would like her to text back with an answer and maybe ask you a question, so this goes back and forth, rather than, you know what I mean, a very short text, concluded, now you're done. I said, that's not a very nice way to be. If you like this picture, right? You know how this goes. Well, do you know what? That's not a relationship. You know what I mean? That's just analysis. And you have him, he doesn't trust her and she doesn't trust him. There's this whole period of analysis and rational deduction and examination and, is she really there or not? Will she be there tomorrow? So, there's one girl that texts him, and then we're like, have this thing, we're all very, very hopeful. You know what I mean? Like, here I am, I feel like I'm watching like a TV show or something, it's so exciting. And then I find out, come back, did she text you again? No. Next day, did she text you again? I said, I better stop asking this. 2 months passes, and then she texts. Then he comes back. She texted again. I said, that's not a good sign. 2 months passed. What is this girl? Here today, gone tomorrow. Well, why do I say all this? When we're talking about spirituality, I think in some ways, for some of us, it's more like an academic exercise. And we're just trying to figure ourselves out, and we're trying to figure out the world, we're analyzing things, and we're comparing things. And we're just trying to get our category straight and get the words, and figure out what all the words are. And we're still in that exploratory phase. And that's a completely legitimate exploratory phase. But as I look at the history of the human species, as I look at my own story in life, and I listen to other people's stories, we as humans have something in us that draws us beyond just simply analyzing our environment and putting everything into categories. There's something within us that we as creatures want meaning. We want purpose. We want to be a part of a larger story. And to find in our lives, not just that simply we had all the answers, we had all the categories. We had that Facebook filled up with lots of friends, with lots of nice pictures. That somehow we've categorized our lives and made that sort of scrapbook of information. We want to be a part of a story. We want to have a security to know that our story is a part of a larger story, and somehow I've found my place in this universe, and I've made genuine connections, and I've had real relationships. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, because the question that we're asking, is spirituality meaningful? I think what we could say, by studying the human race, for the vast majority of people over time, all times and place, spirituality has some forms of meaning because it just keeps popping up everywhere, and it just is something we all share. And we might want to talk about how is it meaningful, in what different ways is it meaningful. But I think the question itself, really for the human race, as I think about for my own life, this is what gets at the core of our spirituality. And this is what I think sets us apart from all other creatures on the planet. There are many, many living creatures that move about that have physical beings. There are also many, many creatures that have attributes that we have. They problem solve, they think, they work at things, they build things. They have social units, and they move about. But there's something about we as humans that transcend that. There's a spiritual dimension that goes beyond that. Beavers, they may build a dam, but they don't set up little monuments to their little beaver friends when they die, right? And in the graves of the beavers, they don't put in like extra nuts for the journey, right? There's something about us. The love of beauty and creativity and music and story. We don't see those elements in the creatures. There's an element to us, we as humans. We think we should live on. We think that there is something more out there. And we pursue that. And not only that, we believe that there's a story we're meant to be a part of. There's a mission, and there's myths and tales, and whether they're drawn on a cave or passed on in tribal folklore, we believe we're meant to be a part of something else, and that's what we're wrestling with. I want to zero in on Jesus because I guess he's sponsored tonight, right? It's all the people who like Jesus are putting this on. So let's talk about Jesus. Jesus is an interesting figure in the human race because his story has captivated a lot of people's attention. And the things that he said has captured a lot of people's imaginations. How does Jesus frame this issue of meaning? How does he describe it? And what does he say or suggest about being a part of this connection with each other and with God? The context of first century Palestine, where Jesus appears and his story unfolds, was a context where they as a small nation believed that there was one unifying cosmic force, one God, one ultimate conscious energy being that made everything. This set them apart as an oddity, because the vast majority of people believed in a much more sort of pantheistic, a wider range of spiritual beings and spiritual forces, and they had different mythologies, different ways of trying to capture the wisdom and insights of a world that was moved by many different types of forces. And this notion of one single conscious being was more unique. That wasn't the common belief, but they believed that. And their concept of this one God, this one being, was very much rooted in, you do something wrong, someone's got to pay, and there's this real strong sense of justice. And if you do something wrong, you're in trouble. And if you do something right, that's good. And so as they developed this concept and lived it, they had a concept of sacrifice, which was well known. That is a way to appease God's sense of justice, as something should die or there should be a price paid. And if somebody did something wrong, there might be consequences they have to follow up with. And so that was very much at the center of their sacrificial system and of sacrifice. So with this then also emerged of who's doing the right thing, who's doing the wrong thing, and this one being that wants us to treat each other a certain way. As they looked out around them, the larger sort of political landscape, and they looked at the Roman Empire and the different entities there, they tended to see wrong, bad, evil, this is terrible, and we're trying to do the right thing, and everybody else out there is, for the most part, doing the wrong thing. And so quickly got into the categories. Those are the bad people. Those are the enemies. We're the good, struggling victims here, trying to just make our way. And we wish that the big being that created the whole universe would come here and get rid of all the bad people, and then we would finally have an easier time doing the right thing. That storyline is actually pretty common. That's not that unique to the human race, because there's lots of places in history you can take a look at, whether it's a tribe or a nation or a small group or just an individual. It's sort of like everybody else around me is screwed up. I'm the only one, you know what I mean? And I would be a wonderful person if I didn't live among a bunch of idiots, right? Many of you may have this in your own dorm rooms. right? That's not uncommon for us as humans to project out onto other people that, the biggest problem in my life is everybody else, right? I'm inherently a good person. If I just finally had the right context, I could finally just be the incredible person I want to be, but all these other people are dragging me down. And this whole pattern of thinking has led to a huge amount of warfare and fighting or division and conflict. So they're really, in a lot of ways, if you think of it from a sociological point of view, they're living out pretty much our common human experience. This belief in one God hadn't really changed their outlook on life. In fact, actually, and I think this maybe, I wasn't here for the first night when you're talking about is spirituality dangerous. I think one of the biggest problems with ultimate truth is that once you think you've landed on ultimate truth, that somehow justifies that anybody who opposes you is now a barrier to ultimate truth. Therefore, I am relieved of a responsibility to treat you as a human. You now have stepped down a class. Therefore, I can wipe you out because that's good for the planet. And actually, I think that is what has led the sense of there's so many atrocities committed by this tribe. The only solution to dealing with this tribe is genocide. And that has been with the human race for a very long time. And it isn't related to religion, I would argue. It's related to ultimate truth. You see, you could be an atheist and believe that for social evolution to take place according to the evolutionary scale, that it is right to commit genocide to allow the advance of the superior being. It doesn't have to be religious, it's just ultimate truth. It gives us that leverage. So I think that part can be very dangerous. I hope you guys talked about that. Well, anyways, Israel was playing into a storyline that for a lot of us, that's how we would play. Jesus appears, and he's got something radical to say to his own people and beyond. And basically what he tries to do is help people reframe ultimate reality, the ultimate being that created us all, and then what the problem is with each other. And he tells a story, and it's maybe a story you've heard before. It's a story about a father and two sons. It's a very simple story, and here's how it goes. There's a younger brother who wanted to ditch the home. He was tired of his old man's rules. Give me all my money now. Wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance. I'm out of here. And he grabs what he can get. His dad is dumb enough to give him his inheritance before he's dead. He takes off, goes in the city, parties as hard as he can until he's bankrupt. He ends up, as you may know, in a pigsty, hungry, eating what pigs eat, and he's basically wasted every good thing his foolish father gave him. In that moment, he comes to his senses and realizes, do you know what? I'm such an idiot. If I go back to my dad's house and if you just take me on as a slave, my dad's slaves are treated better than I am being treated right now. And I might have some hope, not that he'd ever accept me as a son again. I've screwed up so badly, I want to go home. And see if he'll take me on as a slave. So the story unfolds that he heads back home, and here's this father. And if you're have a sense or have connected with a parent's love for their kids, if you're a loving parent, the story actually makes a lot of sense. The father has been keeping his eye on the horizon. He recognizes, how his son walks. And in the story, the father runs weeping and grabs his son. And, before the son can really get out a proper apology and, will you take me back as a slave and all the rest, the father is just lavishing him with love, cleans him up, gives him a ring, fully restores him, and says, we're going to throw the best party because my kid's finally home. All the way the son had failed was infinitely secondary to the fact that he was home. Well, there's two sons, remember? There's another son. This son had not left. He had stayed home. He had been faithful. He had worked hard. He had been out in the fields, up and down the fields, work, 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 work. This son comes home, really ticks him off because he's been ticked off, probably because he's been doing twice the work, right? And he sees the father make this big deal about this jerk of a younger brother that I have, this idiot who's wasted half of our inheritance and brought shame on our family. And now he's home and we're throwing a party and there's been no sense of justice whatsoever. He's really ticked off, angry. There's no way I'm going to this party. It's not uncommon for siblings to have these kind of rivalries, right? So the father comes back out, and the father again is showing his emotional side. He's coming out to plead. He's humbling himself. Please, don't you get what's going on here? You know, everything I have is yours already. You already have everything. But you know, this younger brother of yours, you know, he's dead. He's alive. He's home. He starts pleading with her, come in. Please come into the party. Let go of your judgment. Let go of your self-righteousness. Jesus, when he tells that story, he's trying to help his hearers imagine a number of things, see their world in a different way, to be a part of a different kind of story. And this is what I see in the story. Jesus, first of all, in telling the story, is trying to help us think through what's wrong with the human heart. What are the things that are going to trip me up? And there's two parts, not one part of my heart. There's two parts of my heart that could get me in trouble. Two parts of how I could look at my life or respond to people around me. The first part of me is sort of like the younger brother. And do you know what that is? That's just that, and that's just that really selfish part of me, where I want to take every good thing I have and spend it on myself. And do you know what? That part of me, to be honest, that younger brother story, that's a pretty good picture, because do you know what? I don't really have a lot of limitations. When it comes to me self-indulging, it's not like there's a natural limitation there. I love to self-indulge. You know what I mean? It's like if I have a piece of chocolate cake, I want a second and a third, right? I don't have a problem sitting there as conscious, like, you know, do you know what, Tim? Just stop there. I just want to keep going. But it may not be as innocent as chocolate cake. There's all sorts of ways that we as humans self-indulge. To the point even of like addictions that are going to destroy our lives. We'll just keep going at that. And we can have that experience. If we keep self-indulging, we could end up, and I could end up having that same experience as the younger brother, where I got myself into such a mess, and this is, you know, true. Drug addicts, sex addicts, could get to the place where you so destroyed your life, you end up in a mess, and you're stuck, and you don't know how to get out. That self-indulgence can lead to a pit that you can't get yourself out of. And so Jesus puts his finger on this and says, yeah, that's a part of the human heart's experience, or the human experience. That's one of those real problems we struggle with. But there's another part of the human experience we struggle with, and that's the part of the older brother that I struggle with. And that has to do with the sense of me trying to be in control of my own life and get it all together and climb up this ladder of success, organize my life, be in charge of everything. But when I get to that, whatever perch I land on becomes a place on which I can evaluate everybody else. And then I start to look down my nose at others and like, do you know what? You're bad. I, on the other hand, have pulled it together. Right? And we start to categorize people and put people into this lesser category. We have our own interior social caste system that starts to allocate to people who the losers are, right? And somehow in our caste structures, I always end up looking pretty good. I'm up there. I never look in the mirror and go like, do you know what? As I'm looking at myself, I'm an evil, bad person. Very few of us will do that. The vast majority of us will build a caste system on what our achievements are. We'll pick our values, position ourselves, and look down. So Jesus comes along and says, do you know what? That's a problem with the human race. That can create a lot of problems. We can become stuck in a pit of our own self-indulgence that becomes self-destructive to our relationships. We can also climb up our own ladders of success and end up looking down on people and again putting them in a category that causes us to break our relationships. And we stand at a distance because we're offended, because we don't think they measure up, and our relationships suffer because of that. Those are two things. What's really fascinating in the story when you compare it, the younger brother, because of his pain, comes to his senses and doesn't want to stay there. The older brother, the story ends and we don't know whether or not he'll come to his senses. This gives me another interesting piece to the human heart. And if you think about it, it's very interesting. Adults don't learn typically unless they're in pain. Okay? So the one part of my human heart actually comes with more hope. If I keep self-indulging, there's a good chance my life's going to get so screwed up I'm going to have pain, I might come to my senses. But you know what? If I have another part where I just think I'm better than everybody else and I am always putting it together, I'm always in control and looking down, I might never experience enough pain to come to my senses. I might actually just live a proud, isolated, or elitist life and never actually come to my senses because it doesn't generate enough pain for me to come to senses. It's an interesting story in terms of how Jesus tells it. Well, there's another character, and that's the Father. And Jesus has this amazing vision of the creator of the universe that actually is relational, loving, and looks at us not as little creatures that somehow have to measure up to a certain standard, but as a being who is trying to draw all of humanity with all of our messed up elements together, not only to be reconciled to the Creator, but to be reconciled to each other. That's an amazing story. It was a shocking story for the Israelites because that meant they would have to start to love people they had categorized as enemies. That was shocking. It is also a shocking story because what it says is all the ways that we could choose to categorize ourselves in terms of who's good, who's bad, that there is a higher principle at work. And that was a principle, a transcendent sort of principle, that would say if the ultimate being that created this universe operates on this vision of transcendent mercy and love, that's as foolish as a father who had run across a field to hug an estranged son, then for us to be at peace, for us to come into harmony with, to be aligned with this being, means that we ourselves have to now enter into this transcendent love. So that when we look out and say, do you know what, you're of a different culture. You eat different food, you have different music, you dress in a different way. In some way, the creator of this universe is telling me, when I connect with him, you are my brother or sister. I need to find out how to party with you, not hate you or be afraid of you, but to live in community with you. Or it might be somebody who has failed and has done horrible things, that this love is saying, doesn't matter how horrible that is. Can we get to the place? And let me tell you a simple story about this. I was in Zimbabwe, and I was talking with someone from the Ndebele tribe. The Shonas and the Ndebele in Zimbabwe have a history of tribal hatred. And the one man was telling me this. He was saying that in his village, when the Shonas came through with machetes, and in their last machete battle had killed, one of the stories was, had killed a pregnant woman in front of her husband. And it killed the child, the unborn child first, before killing the wife. That this story had become reinforced in terms of how much they hated the Shona. And the only solution was the death of every single Shona. There's so much injustice, so much pain. You see, Jesus' story in that says, if you want to align with the creator of the universe, at some point in time, it's not saying what happened wasn't an atrocity. It was. But that creator of the universe is trying to get that to stop. And what that means at some point in time is if you were part of that type of atrocity, aligning with the creator of the universe means you have to somehow open yourself up to let that go. All the religious hatred, all the racial hatred, all the caste hatred, the poor hating the rich, that this has to be let go, that there's a higher, more transcendent love. There's a greater vision for humanity than all this division and hate. This is what Jesus came to bring. That's why his message is so radical, and so radical 2,000 years ago. At the essence of it was enemy love, was the reconciliation of all people to each other and ultimately to their Creator. What an incredible vision for humanity. What an incredible story. that forgiveness can have the final word, that mercy can triumph over judgment, that there is no male, no female, no slave, no free, no Jew, no Gentile, but that we can be one. As you start to think through this concept of relationship, and with this I close, I want to leave a final story. And it's a story of a guy who really blew it. A number of years ago, I lived out in Belleville. Does anybody here from Belleville? Belleville. Kingston, close. I like it. Eastern Ontario, gotta love it. Anybody else from Kingston? Oh, yeah, very embarrassed about that, but I see the hand up. Okay. Out in Belleville, a guy's name is Robert, and he had lived his whole life as probably more like the younger brother than the older brother. Very selfish sort of guy. He just lived for himself. And do you know what? In time, that selfishness just made him sort of a mean guy. And he really didn't care what anybody thought. And he just, in time, burned all of his bridges because everybody around him was an idiot, and he was, you know what I mean? He was just doing his own thing. I got to know him because Robert was a chain smoker, and he got terminal cancer. And so he was 42 years old, and the clock had been hit, and there's nothing to stop it. He had about 6 months to live. And that's when I met him. Finding out that you're going to die in 6 months has a way of changing your priorities. Okay? So I got to know Robert. He's very scared. He's very scared of what was on the other side of death. He wanted to talk about that. He's very alone. He had nobody. There's one niece who would talk to him. Nobody in his family would talk to him. And nobody in the town actually would talk to him. He's just a guy who's all on his own facing death. So I got to know him, and I began to talk to him. And over time, we began to process the questions that he had. And he finally said he wanted to be at peace with God and have peace so he could die. And this whole vision of a God who is so loving and so forgiving, who wanted to be known as a loving parent, not as an angry judge or a watchmaker or an architect, but as a loving parent who could forgive him, this story became very meaningful to him. And so he finally, hearing about Jesus, talking, looking at all these ideas of like loving enemies and people can be forgiven and all those things, that became super, super important to him, to the point where he said, I want, even though nobody in that church that you go to really knows me, I want to, go through this thing of baptism, this thing of public declaration that I'm following Jesus, even though I only have a couple months to live. So I said, okay, we'll do it. So we were having a thing where a pool of water, and a bunch of people had gathered. And so I said to Robert, I said, before we're baptized, you want to follow, commit your life to Jesus, what you have left of it, you want to say something to everybody here about why you want to do it. And do you know what, as he stood beside me, it was so heartbreaking. All he did was cry. He couldn't talk. He just cried and cried and cried. And I realized in the moment that was his heart being poured out in front of everybody, that he needed to be loved. And in that moment, he was receiving love from a community and from a creator. That no matter how selfish or how screwed up he was and how many bad choices he made, that he was still a valued, loved person. I baptized him that day, his commitment. And was every day perfect? No, it was hard, obviously. And he was alone. I stood with him at his bedside, holding his hand as he breathed his last breath until he stopped. And that was how Robert passed from this life into the next life. As we come down this thing about, is spirituality meaningful? Fortunately, most of us in this room, we're still in a pretty vital place. The chances are nobody here in this room in the next 6 months will see their life come to an end. In fact, it's probably a long ways in the distance for most of us. Yet, I want to throw this out to you. Having stood beside and walked with, in the role that I have, I get to walk with people through their death. I've done this with a number of people. As you progress through life, in the early phases of life, we tend to want to figure it out, how does this all work, what decisions I'm going to make. As we move along and we get closer and closer to our death, the sense of what is the meaningful purpose of my life? Where is this headed? What happens at the end? I can say this for a fact. If you doubt me, I encourage you to go and stand with somebody who's dying. When you get to the end, you reset all of your priorities. And you have other things that become really, really important to you at the end. I believe spirituality is meaningful to the human race. This is what I believe. I believe because we were created to desire connection with each other and with our Creator. That's the appetite within us. And that what we call spirituality is just the desire for a love connection that can bring a sense of peace, of I like you, I respect you, and we can hang out. Not just between a man or woman, between a parent or child, but between all people. That can lead to a type of trust, a type of faith, and then can allow us to experience that sense of peace even with life beyond. That I think this is what our hearts long for. This is in a sense the story we all want to find ourselves in. That the world truly does operate on this principle of mercy. That it does operate on this transcendent love that gets us out of the cycle of hate. And that as we embrace that story, that our life finds that sense of peace and purpose and meaning. I think that's why I follow Jesus. Because as I put it together in my own heart, even at the end, if when I die and lights are out and I don't exist, I become like, the power's out on my battery and it's out. I will have lived up to that moment with a sense of peace and purpose and this sense of higher calling that actually gives me a sense of vitality in the moment, that even when pain comes, struggle comes, or somebody lets me down, there's a love moving in me that allows me to see beyond it. That, in a sense, that offense or that failure does not have the final word. Now, having said that, I don't think the lights go out. I actually do think that there is a life beyond. And for that gets me really excited. That I can not only live this way now, but I have hope that when I transition, I actually get to enter into even more of what I'm experiencing now. So, some thoughts to kick around. I think what we're going to do is do some Q&A. And Michael, there's the man. Let's take some time for some Q&A. I'm glad to field some questions. I know our other speakers too, Margaret and Dave, are glad to field some questions. You guys want to interact on this? Do some Q&A? Oh, I'll just have, okay. Yes. I have a question that my friend Sure. He asks, why is spirituality necessary to live a meaningful life? Why is spirituality meaningful to live a meaningful life? I don't think so. I think because meaningful is just meaningful to me, right? So I don't think, I think you can be a fully, just not believe that humans are spiritual in that sense. You could say there's a word to describe some higher functioning, but in that sense of there being another energy force that is beyond the material that we can analyze, and synthesize, that we're, in a sense, we're just, evolutionary creatures that have grown up and that there's no God or other higher being. And I think you can have meaning. I think people can find meaning in many things. Now, I would say that based on the human race collectively, I think that's more the exception than the rule. I think the vast majority of people, particularly as they get, again, not everybody. There are some people who really are quite comfortable saying, I'm just a highly evolved animal that when I die, I decompose. I'm cool with that. And it's like, okay. Yeah. So I don't think it's necessary. Good question, though. It's great to know that you're free to not believe. Right? You don't have to be cornered on this one. Yeah, another question, yes. Why would God create people if they know they won't choose to believe? I think that's a great question. Why would God create people? And this relates to if you expand the question out a little bit, why would God create beings that are capable of making choices that wouldn't agree with his choices? Whether it's I don't believe that you exist, or I don't want to do the things that you want me to do. Why would he create autonomous beings that ultimately have their own identity and being? And I think from the biblical narrative, where we just use that, the simplest answer is that to have true relationship, there has to be the autonomy of another being that's capable of making their own choice. And so in other words, it's saying, for me to truly say, I love you, I like you, I want to be with you, I respect you, those type of qualities we talk about loving relationship, that other person has to equally be able to say, I don't like you, I don't respect you, I don't want to be with you. And so that's the risk of love. That's the risk of relationship. And that the Creator God took that risk in creation, wanting community, wanting that more transcendent experience. If you think of this in another way, why would I want to have a child, Nathan, Rachel, and Josh? Because all sorts of terrible things could happen. My son could grow up and was like, Dad, you're an idiot. Shoot me the finger, the bird, and be gone. And then I am heartbroken. This son that I raised and poured my life into just walked away, and I've never seen him again. I don't even know where he dies or where he goes. It's a terrible risk. So why don't I just not have children? And I just have, robots. I can buy little robots. I can program my voice into it. Like, I love you, Daddy. And then every time I come in, I hit the robot. And he goes, I love you, Daddy. And I can have 1,000 of them. Right? And everywhere I go, I love you. That's because at the end, it's it's not a relationship. That's actually weird. You know what I mean? That's just a weird way of operating. And we actually think it's very, the risk of love. Right? The risk of love, I think, is just something indigenous to who we are. And it's a beautiful thing. I guess he weighed that out against the risk of, this is an interesting thought, the risk of being alone. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Why does God want relationship? Maybe maybe we're not that different. Maybe I don't want to be alone. Maybe he doesn't want to be alone. Just things to think about. It's interesting. Good question. Other questions? Yes.
We actually had a text-in question for David here.
Nice.
How did science help build your faith?
Nice. Good question.
How did science help build my faith? It's a question that I got before is, how do you reconcile science and Christianity together? And the way I look at it is, if God created everything, if he created the entire universe, he had to create essentially the way everything works, which science is just studying the way things work. We, in science, constantly modify our theories. So when I look at science, I just look at it as we are slowly getting glimpses into God's creation that we didn't have before. So how does it strengthen? Every time I figure something out, I think it's so cool how God had already set that up. He had already put that in place. And it's kind of like, I don't have children right now, but I've seen with my nephews where they're playing with a game or something, and then you see the look of excitement when they figure out something new in that. And the joy that they get in that, that's the same type of joy that we get as scientists when we discover something. If you talk to any of your professors who are doing research, look at how excited they get when they put out a paper, when they make a new discovery. They're so excited. And why is that? We're getting a little bit more glimpse, a little bit more understanding of the bigger picture. Will we ultimately know the whole picture? I don't think so. But we're moving forward. We're learning little bits more of the information. And that's how science has really strengthened my faith that way.
That's awesome, David. If I could add to that, this is something that what I want to share with you, this relates to David. I think it'll tie into other relationships that you have. Remember I talked about John Gottman and his institute and the value of trust in terms of I like you, I respect you, I want to spend time with you. If you send those messages back and forth, I'll trust you. Then we can go on to higher things like solve problems, work at goals, and create shared meaning. Here's something really interesting about trust. Have you ever heard the phrase self-fulfilling prophecy? Have you ever heard that phrase? A couple of you have. It's a new word. You can use it. It'll make you, a new phrase that you can use in your relationships. Here's what goes on. If I don't trust you, I look for the data points to reinforce why you're not a trustworthy person. So that's what pops out. Aha, you're late. Aha, you didn't text me right back. See the way that you looked at me there? That looked like you're being sort of sneering at me. And you look for those data points. And then in time you go, see, that's why I don't trust you, because you're not a trustworthy person. You're a jerk. You don't like me. I don't like you. Now, once it switches to I trust you, then you look for the data points of why I trust you. And you look for those reinforcing data points. And it's like, oh, do you know what? They were late, but do you know what? They smiled when they came in. And they obviously had a good reason. And, when they looked at me and they sneered a bit, it looks like they had gas. And, they were trying to hide it from me because they're a bit embarrassed. You know what I mean? Oh, that's sweet. You know what I mean? We take all the same data points, but we put it through different filters. They're like glasses. Am I wearing red glasses where everything looks red, or blue glasses, everything looks blue? That's what trust does. So if I don't like LeBron James, right? Everything he does, I don't like about LeBron James, right? Some of you are like, amen, preach it, brother. Now we're getting onto the good stuff. Okay? But then there's other people maybe I do like Kevin Durant. I like Kevin Durant. Why is he so funny? Why is he so nice? I like Kevin Durant, right? The reality is those filters, I look and I pick up data points. So, for you, David, as you say, when I get into science, this is awesome, right? But that's coming from a place of trust, where you now have, in a sense, you're looking for those places, those points of connection. And so for some of you, that place of trust, of do I trust God is there? Here's the thought I'd throw out to you. That position that you're in right now could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Saying, I'm a skeptic. Everything I look, I read all these arguments and stuff like that. I'm going through those lenses and I just always get the same data. You might want to try to ask yourself, should I put myself in a more neutral position? And not be someone who believes and not be a skeptic, but move it into a neutral position. And volley something into the universe and to say, God, if you're there, you know what? All along, all I've ever seen is all these data points of why you're not there. But I'm going to volley it. I'm going to take a risk. If you're there, I'm going to throw this out. What do I have to lose? I'm going to try to put myself in a neutral position. Can you give me some data points or help me see some things of why I might believe? I would even say that for those who do believe. If you're one of those people and you say that and say, do you know what? I've never really critically questioned why I believe. I've just been on autopilot. I think it's all right for you at this stage to have those moments. I have chosen to keep well alive in my interior, my psyche, an inner skeptic, so that I'm constantly looking for truth. And I think that's a good scientist, right? You have a hypothesis, but you're actually ultimately looking for truth. And you're trying to prove it. And so I'd encourage you both ways. I think that in terms of the spirit of this forum, that we're not trying to produce a sort of thoughtless, blind trust. It's actually meant to be a self-aware pursuit of truth. That in that process, we trust that if there's a creator God, that pursuit will honor him and will ultimately lead to a better connection, a better sense of genuinely who he is. Does that make sense? We're down to a couple more questions. Yes?
These questions are actually really deep and philosophical.
Oh, cool.
So when you told the story of Robert and how you held his hand as he passed from one life to the next, you mentioned how his priorities changed.
Yes.
So a two-part question. The first part, what do you consider to be of priority? And also, what role do you see of religion in palliative care and bereavement?
Oh, okay. Very good. Yeah. I think priority, how I was using that word, and that has to do with those sense of goals or values that order our lives, that we would just simply say, I want to give greater attention or focus to something and something else. So if I make a priority of a relationship or of a pursuit, that when I said his priorities changed, prior to that he had certain goals, which was basically to get as much out of life as he could for himself, irrespective of consequences on anybody else, which means if he burned all his bridges, he didn't really care because he had a single priority. Once he faced his own death and he realized he was alone, he realized that whole game did not produce a very good end result, and that he was going to die alone. That scared him deeply. And so he changed his priority. He wanted to have some sort of connection with God, some sort of connection with other people. That's what flipped. I think in terms of religion and bereavement and care, depends on how you use the word religion. If you use, because it's like the word trunk, you're talking about the trunk of my car or the trunk on the nose of an elephant. Religion can be used in different ways. And so if you mean religion as a broad sweeping category for just talking about any form of spirituality where people are trying to connect with God, then I think in death for many people, and this goes back for thousands of years, that's obviously an important time when people are trying to make a connection with something beyond. There's another way you can use religion, which has to do with sort of a various forms of a stairway to heaven, which has to do with a system, rules, regulations, rituals, routines you have to go through as a self-improvement process to be accepted. And what I would say is, if you have a highly developed ritualistic pattern of religion, in other words, I have to get myself ready to meet this creator of the universe, in bereavement and care, that actually can become a very fearful thing for people, where they're very worried about, I don't measure up, I haven't been a very good person, can somebody please do X, Y, and Z to cover me off because I'm really afraid that I didn't measure up. So I think depending on how you use it, you really have to find out what that person's experience is, what are they feeling, and then find out, okay, what will genuinely bring peace to them in that moment. And I think in death, many times, has been my experience, regardless of the person's background, the words that Jesus shared around his vision of connecting with a God that is more like a loving parent, more like a loving mom or dad who just wants to be close, who is about love and forgiveness and grace, that is an incredibly hopeful thing for somebody who is facing their own death. Yes?
I actually have a question for Dave.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, as a science student myself, how, if you have attempted to reach out to your colleagues at all in potentially sharing your faith, or at least demonstrating that you do have a Christian faith, and how that's been received, because I see often, at least amongst my peers in my classes and whatnot, they often believe that spirituality, particularly Christianity, is irrelevant, and some would even go as far as to say Christianity and the morality that accompanies it is evil and needs to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting question. Thanks. And it's something, I went to a church for an event a couple of years ago, actually, and one of the mothers I was talking to said her son was actually coming to McMaster, and she was excited to hear that he could possibly have a professor who was another Christian. And the funny thing is, a lot of people think that with science backgrounds, that automatically translates into that they have no faith, which is funny because I think it's about 75% of our first-year instructional team are all practicing Christians. So, and a number of the colleagues in my department are actually all Christians. And so because of that, do I feel comfortable sharing my faith? I do, yeah. I have had a number of colleagues who are not. Oftentimes, I don't always bring it up. For the most part, every time that it's happened, it's been, I think just about every time it's happened, it's been them initiating it. I live my life as a Christian. I do my best, and without really necessarily intentionally doing it, God reveals himself through your actions, where it says to live a life that's a testimony. People question that. They wonder. They ask. Sometimes they'll ask what I did that weekend, and I'll say, well, I was involved, I went to church on Sunday, and then that evening I was part of a small group. And that opened up the conversation. Well, what do you mean a small group? And then they ask, and they open the door for that conversation, and they're very receptive to what I have to say because I'm not forcing it on them. They're inviting it in. I'm willing to share it. And to be honest, I've only had one person who hasn't really wanted to hear anything about it, and I'm fine with that. But it's interesting how he keeps bringing it up, even though he doesn't want to talk about it. He keeps bringing it up. It's not me initiating the conversation, so we do actually keep talking about it. So, yeah. I know there is challenges, though, how some people are dead set against it, and we're called upon to be witnesses. We're not called upon to be lawyers or judges or anything else. So I just witness when I'm given the opportunities.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I think one more question? One more, and then, because we're right at the 8:30, got to respect the time for everyone.
There's about 5 more, but I'll limit it to one.
We can hang out afterwards. If you asked a question, you can come on down. I'd love to chat.
I'll ask this one because this, I think, might be the most interest to the most people. Why is Christian spirituality meaningful over and above anyone other spirituality?
I would assume you're talking about like a faith, Buddhism, or any of the sort of the spectrum of different world religions.
I suppose so, yes.
That's maybe what's behind that? Or, yeah, okay.
Yeah, why is Christian spirituality over and above other spirituality beliefs?
I think for people where they have committed to a particular worldview, religious view, spiritual track, for many of them, it's very meaningful. And so I don't know that I'd like to get into mine's more meaningful than yours, sort of comparative, because I think that could potentially, almost create a sense of, I don't know, trying to like argue in a sort of an elite status. We have the inside track on meaning. I don't know if that's the case. I would shift it off of meaning because I do think it's meaningful. I would encourage people to compare the different world religions and to get at the essence of what is its ultimate fruit. What is it going to produce? What type of vision or story for humanity is it going to accomplish? And how does that resonate with you? How does that help you sort out where you're going in life? And what has drawn me to Jesus, and having studied all of them, is this, quite honestly, I'll distill it down to this vision of a kind of love that transcends our tendency to make enemies of people and calls us to reconcile all castes, all races, all perspectives into a community that is based on love and grace. And that particular message, which is not about karmic justice, it's not about achieving a certain standard and others have not achieved that standard. It really is, it's a different sort of vision. And it's well worth reading books that compare world religions, but that's what draws me in. That may be meaningful for you, that may resonate for you, or you may say your perspective that you hold right now is more meaningful to you. You hear that and that doesn't grab you. That's okay. But anyways, that, as we're comparing it, that's to me is what is the essence of what has become meaningful for me, and that vision. As we draw to a close, I want to come back. Remember this whole, my son trying to sort out the girl on the other end of this? I want to leave this because sometimes you come away from this and we're talking about it out here, but then you're talking about how do I take a next step? What would be my next step if I want to take a step? I'm right now not at a place where I feel overly connected to God and I want to venture out. If God is the way you describe it, Tim, how would I make a next step? And I think the relationship model is a great way to look at it. And sometimes people say, just pray. And then you say that to somebody and just say, pray God, and say, I want to be connected to you. And then the person sits down and is like, that's really awkward. Like, do I stand up and shout it in my room, or do I just sit there and think it real hard, and then that sends a beam up to God? What do I do? And I honestly, in the relationship model, when you go up to somebody and you're trying to talk to them for the first time, it's just really awkward, right? And you're just trying to get the conversation going. I would just encourage, awkward conversations where you're like, okay, whether it's in your thoughts or you say it out loud, just, God, if you're there, here I am. I want to try this out. What does this mean to connect with you? What does it mean to have a relationship? I'm willing to do some learning. Like any relationship, I'm willing to put myself out there, and I'm willing to pursue it. And I would encourage, like what we're doing here, this might be the first time you've come out to have these kind of conversations. Chat with a person maybe or come up and talk to one of the profs here or whatever, and just say, tell me more. Help me get connected. I have a lot of questions. I threw this out and said, God, I want to connect. Help me figure that out. And start a journey. Start that awkward journey. The cool thing is, an awkward relationship, it takes a while to get over that awkwardness, but once it gets going, once it gets flowing, it turns into a relationship. And so as you hear here, and I think David and Margaret both modeled that, it shifts out of that awkwardness, I'm not sure you're there, into something where David can say, I'm going through a tough time, and I feel his presence. I feel the presence of God with me. And it has become something that is a secure presence in his life, and it becomes a relationship. Doesn't happen overnight, but I encourage you. Some people talk about saying the sinner's prayer. Have you ever heard that? Say the sinner's prayer. Has any of you heard that? Wow, it's really phased out. They used to say that all the time. Well, anyways, I don't know. If you think that you're messed up and you think that's an issue, you might want to throw that out to God. But I think the basic starting point is just saying, God, I want to connect. Help me understand where you are. And then get around some people who are asking that same question or wrestling with it, and track with them and see what starts to unfold. So, some thoughts. Who do I turn it back to? Where's Michael? Right here. Here's the man. Thanks, everybody.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.